Aye. Lewis writes in saying, I've got to praise Keith Jackson's very personal column regarding David Murray. Murray says that he cared deeply about Rangers, but selling the club to Craig White has tarnished whatever legacy he had. This very action led to an eventual demise, which we've never truly recovered from, despite that league title in 2021. Murray is as much to blame for our downfall as White is. And while I'm on this, I might as well go through these. Robbo says, Keith Jackson, take a bow, son, calling out Murray for the absolute lies he's telling, all because he brought a book out. There'll be Rangers fans who'll fall for the Murray sob story, the very same ones that enjoyed all the glory but have suffered demotion to the bottom league as a result. And I wanted to get your take, Keith, on the first comment there from Lewis on Murray's legacy, because, look, lest we forget, Murray oversaw the most successful period in Rangers history. In many ways, was the catalyst for it for 9 in a row.
It's sad.
Aye.
It's sad in many ways, Dan.
But in your mind, does it completely tarnish that now?
Oh yeah,
Without a doubt.
it obliterates it. I mean, as he said himself in various interviews, there were great times for Rangers and their supporters during David Murray's time as chairman. He did some really significant things, not least the signing of Maurice Johnson, which shattered a sectarian signing policy, which disgraced the club for so long. He dragged Rangers into the modern day by doing that, and it took a brave man to do it. It took a big man, and David Murray and Graham Souness were those guys. Maurice Johnson as well shouldn't be forgotten. But that look at how that changed the course of history, and how it's now no longer an issue. Rangers sign a Catholic player, nobody bats an eyelid, and quite rightly so. But only because David Murray did that back then. Mm-hmm. You also look at it. The decision to appoint Walter Smith when Graham Souness leaves, massive moment for Rangers. The signings of guys like Paul Gascoigne, Laudrup, 9 in a row. These were all massive, significant achievements, and they were all, attributable to David Murray's stewardship of the football club. But ultimately, his decision to sell to Craig White, despite all the warnings, is what triggered the collapse that eventually saw Rangers go into administration, liquidation, the bottom tier of the Scottish League. It was an absolute catastrophic blunder. Mm-hmm. And I'm afraid that is the legacy that it has to live with. And it's a great shame. But it's just a fact.
Aye. You can see in the comment section there, the Bucky Trucker is asking, why, if Keith is so great, why didn't Keith call it out in the papers at the time of Rangers' takeover? That kind of segues into my last kind of question on David Murray. You mentioned...
I
was going to say that's
repeatedly for over the course of 6 months.
But in terms of you mentioned it in your column, the wealth off the radar, Motherwell billionaire thing. I mean, how much do you hold David Murray kind of responsible for setting you on that path?
Yeah, there's a lot of that, I'll be honest. I feel as if we were used, and there were people I trusted, not least my own editor, my own boss, who came to us with a story. And look, do you know what? It's probably there's too much water gone under the bridge to start throwing stones about it. But yeah, do I feel that the Daily Record was manipulated and used in order to present Craig White as a credible guy with untold wealth? Yes, I do. Do I regret my part in that? I've regretted it since day one. And as I said, I'll that's something that I need to carry because it was poor. It was really poor. But I do think that I then spent a lot of time over the subsequent months and then, after the takeover, exposing Craig White for what he really was. And it was us, eventually that I wrote in his first summer that he was using a financial scheme which was very similar to the one that led to bankruptcy for Leeds, effectively. Put them down the divisions in England by, selling off future season tickets in order to finance the takeover, which, as far as I could see, was a blatant, breach of it's criminal law, never mind business ethics. And I wrote that story originally around about the June time. And it wasn't, we couldn't. White denied it. Of course he did. I actually had to go into a phone call and I was forced by my boss at that time to apologise in case that the Daily Record was banned. And I had to apologise through gritted teeth, I have to tell you. And I could hear this guy on the other end of the phone bumbling and stuttering. And it wasn't a great moment, but I knew the story was right. I knew it was. But I then had to go away, and I spent the next 6 months or whatever desperately trying to prove that story was correct. And eventually it fell into place. Paul Murray played an absolute blinder in getting the documentation together. And we were in a position by the February of the following year to tell the whole truth, the ticket story. And I think it was only about a week after that the administrators were being called in.
Mm.
So yeah, an eventful period, that's for sure.
I've only got a couple of little additional questions before we wrap up on this. William is one of a few people asking, would Keith like to sit down and interview Murray again?
Yeah, I would. Yeah, but I just that's not going to happen.
No.
Look, there was. Look, I'm not, again. I don't want this to sound in any way bitter, but there were certain people were selected to do the interviews from certain publications and platforms, and they've all done a good job. They've gone, they've interviewed them. They've got some decent lines and all that. There'd probably been a different conversation if it was me and David. There's probably a reason that invitation didn't come in our direction. But there you go. Each to their own. It's his prerogative.
I've actually got a bit of a surprise for you because joining us now live is Dave.
I wish.
Very, very final question. HTC King says Murray's legacy is overspending in the 90s. EBTs to compete with Celtic. Craig White was a patsy. I only asked this, Keith, just to get your final take on how much of the blame for Rangers' downfall should be apportioned to Murray and White. And I'll jump in and say that, I mean, I think Murray has to take 99% of the blame, really. I mean, Craig White, was just trying to get whatever. Craig White was there and took an opportunity, but David Murray was the guy that gave him that opportunity.
Yeah, and that's what I said. He's going to have to live with it.
Yeah.
But look, right up until I mentioned in the column, right up to the 11th hour, the days before the completion of that takeover, Paul Murray went to Charlotte Square with a counter offer to buy Rangers. But, one of the key strands of that offer was that David Murray's businesses had to take the
EBT, the debt, sorry, the tax.
Whatever that was likely to be, that was part, because as I said, nobody would have bought that club. No legitimate businessman would have bought that club when you didn't know what your liability might be. Craig White was the only guy that was prepared to do that. There's a reason for that, because he had no real interest in doing anything other than putting Rangers into administration.
He knew it was going to
that was the business plan. So Paul Murray put together a really credible attempt at the 11th hour, which, if David Murray had been acting in Rangers' best interest, I think he would admit now himself that he should have taken that deal. But was he allowed to take that deal? Was the bank just determined to get short of that liability? And there, I think you'll find, something a lot closer to the truth.